DreAllDay.com.
Now tuned in to the best show in the show world. This is the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you're gonna get a huge dose of personal initiative. You know what that is? That's that energy that moves you to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. You know how some people just sit around waiting for stuff to happen? I'm gonna show you how to go make things happen. We're gonna put all this together. Yeah, we're gonna put all this together. I'm not just gonna hand you a bunch of ingredients and just tell you to figure it out. No, we're gonna take all these ingredients, we're gonna put them together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, a brand new philosophy for you. We wrote a book on the subject. You can find it at workonyourgamebook.com. And this masterclass right here that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. Today's topic, why it is not bigger than money. It is not bigger than money. Now this topic is another that is related to what's been going on in America, but this topic is, let me tell you one of my skills. See, I can talk about something it is related to a current event, but it's still an evergreen topic. If you haven't noticed that I've been doing it, I want to point it out to you so now you can notice it. But this topic today specifically is coming up because I heard, by the time you listen to this, maybe this whole story has blown over, but that's fine because I got what I needed out of it, which is a great piece of content. I heard that some NBA players, upon the agreement between the players and the teams that they were going to resume the NBA season in late July in Orlando, which again may have already happened by the time you are listening to this, that some players were raising concerns about continuing to play. One of the reasons was some people talked about coronavirus and those and not having their families with them and things like that. But a lot of what I heard many players were saying was based on the fact that with the social and racial unrest and the campaigns for change, or whatever the hell that means, that people wanted to be a part of, players specifically, that they didn't want to have to go to Orlando and be sequestered there because you got to do some type of quarantining and keeping outsiders out and insiders in to make sure that there's no cross-contamination and no possibility of the virus being brought into an environment, at least theoretically, and maybe that won't matter anyway. Maybe people will get it anyway. Maybe it'll be in there and it won't bother people anyway. Who knows? But players were saying that they wanted to, maybe, not all players, but a few players were saying maybe we should sit out so we can be a part of this movement for racial justice that's going on outside in America. Now, I got my own opinions on that we'll talk about at a different time, or maybe we won't. But there are people who are applauding this and people who don't even play in the NBA saying things like, well, you know what? It's not the time for players to be playing basketball because this whole movement and what's going on is bigger than basketball. It's bigger than the money that the players will make. It's bigger than the money that the owners are trying to recoup from the losses that they taken this year. Players should be out doing other things. Now, I'm not in the NBA either, and I got an opinion that I think that is ridiculous. I think that's a ridiculous argument, and I'm going to make the case for why I believe that here in today's class. Why there would be no need for a basketball player who has a full-time job playing basketball to not play ball in order to be part of the quote movement, close quote, that people say is going on out in the streets right now. Something going on in the streets. I don't know if we can call it a movement. There's something going on out there. But if you want to call it a movement, fine, your opinion. I'm going to say why foregoing money in order to support it is not the right move. And I'm going to explain why that matters in the bigger context of things, outside of basketball, outside of the NBA, and outside of what's going on right now, because 10 years from now, somebody's going to be listening to the same masterclass here, and you're going to understand why this matters to you also, person listening to this in 2030. Point number one, the topic again, why it is not bigger than money. I have been, ever since the Minneapolis situation happened with George Floyd losing his life, and obviously a lot of noise being made by a whole lot of different people on different subjects, all related to race. I've been trying to figure out what exactly people are referring to when they talked about systemic racism and systemic oppression. Colin Kaepernick was the first person to bring up this phrase. He's the first person I heard say it back in 2016. But I had never heard anyone quite explain it or articulate what exactly it is how it works, how it happens, and even people who I would talk to who were saying they were in favor of the protests or they need to be changed, and I would question them, asking them certain questions like, what exactly are you talking about? What do you mean? What does it look like? What needs to happen? What's the plan? Who's in charge? What is the strategy? And they couldn't answer those questions. I would ask them things like, what is the thing that you're against? And they would say things, they would use these phrases, systemic this, systemic that, white this and white that. And I would say, what exactly does that mean? And they couldn't really answer the question. So I had to consult the smartest person I know, which is google.com. I consulted Google, looked through several articles, and I found some common traits that kept coming up when the topic was systemic racism or oppression. The common traits that I found, there were 5 specific ones. Number 1, the wealth gap between white people and black and browns. Number 2, incarceration. Number 3, jobs. Number 4, housing. And number 5, health. Wealth, incarceration, jobs, housing, and health. You know what's at the root of all of those elements? Money. Obviously, the wealth gap refers to how much money people have. And when they say wealth gap, in this case, they're talking about how much people's net worth, not how much actual cash you have, but people's net worth. Understand, I did a whole masterclass on wealth. I've done multiple masterclasses on wealth. Let me tell you, the most recent one I did was masterclass 1502. Wealth doesn't buy health, making sure you're taking care of your body. But then number 1477, how to create wealth, understanding what wealth means. Wealth is not just the money that you have. It's not even just the tangible assets you have. It means anything you have that is worth money. If you have knowledge that people want, that is wealth. Or if you know how to do something that other people want to know how to do, that's wealth. Or if you're a yoga or Pilates instructor, that is wealth because you know how to do something that other people are willing to pay to learn it from you. If you can write books, that is wealth. Or if you know how to fix a broken machine and nobody else in the building knows how to fix it, you have wealth, and they got to pay you for that information. You know how to design a great PowerPoint presentation. That is wealth. So when they say wealth, they're talking about money. All right, they're talking about tangible assets such as credit, cash, real estate, things like that. Wealth gap, obviously that's money. Incarceration, and we're gonna get to incarceration in a minute because that's an even bigger discussion. Jobs. If you have a trashy, shitty job, it'll probably pay you less money than a good job, whatever you consider a good job to be. Housing, affordable housing that is suitable for you and your family, making sure there's no asbestos in the walls and the paint, making sure there's no rats and roaches crawling around, where you're living in a neighborhood, as far as your housing, where you can go to a Whole Foods within walking distance or short driving distance. There's a park. There are quality schools where the property values are slowly rising so that you are actually gaining equity in owning a house if you're into owning houses. Health. They say that black and brown children die during their first year of life at a rate much higher than white children die during their first year of life. Why is this? Is it because black and brown parents are smothering and killing their kids? No. Is it because they're trying to? No. It's because the doctors are colluding to destroy black and brown babies? No, I don't think so. The reason is because of poor options when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to the nutrition type of food that those babies get in that first year alive. That's why more black and brown babies die in their first year. All of these are connected to money. Every single one of them is connected to how much money you have and how resourced you are as an individual or as a family. Any of you who does not know the Khalif Browder story, you never heard of that? You never heard that name before? I suggest you fire up Netflix, because I know you have an account, and look up this documentary. Again, his name is Khalif Browder, Khalif, last name Browder. If you don't know this story of Khalif Browder, I'll tell you very briefly. Khalif was a 16-year-old kid living in, I believe, the Bronx, New York. He was out at a party one night, coming home at like 2 o'clock in the morning with a few of his friends when he was stopped by police. There was a victim sitting in the back of the police car who had fingered Khalif as possibly the person who had robbed this victim a week or a few days earlier. Now, mind you, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's dark outside. This person sitting in the back of the car couldn't really tell who was who. This guy apparently had been robbed by a black person who was the same size or height or whatever as this kid Khalif. So the police stop him and they pull him up to the car and they ask the victim sitting in the back seat, hey, is this the guy who robbed you? And the guy says, yeah. He didn't know who it was, but anyway, he said, yeah. Khalif gets arrested on suspicion of armed robbery. Khalif says he was innocent, and he was adamant that he was innocent, but he's in jail. Now, here's how it works in the prison system in America for those of you who are uninformed. When you are arrested, it doesn't mean you're guilty of a crime, it just means you've been charged with a crime. Now, you have your day in court, as everyone does. Khalif got his day in court a few days later. Now, he could have gotten out of jail that night or early the next morning. All he had to do was bail out. This is the way the bail system works. You pay a certain amount of money if the judge decides to award you bail, because sometimes if you have a long enough rap sheet or a strong enough charge against you, the judge can deny you bail and say, no, you're not allowed to bail out. But he was offered bail. His bail was $3,000. In other words, he pays $3,000, him or whoever pays $3,000 to the court on his behalf, and that bail is basically collateral for him showing up at court. You show up at court, then you're fine. But if you don't show up, then whatever that $3,000, whatever that is forfeited, and you don't get to, that's it. Whatever you put up is gone. All right, if you don't if you don't show up to court. I'm stepping over myself here. So anyway, the $3,000 bail, Khalif calls his mom. He lived in the Bronx with his mom and a few of his siblings, and they didn't have the $3,000. They reached out to Khalif's father, who was alive but not in his life. They believe the father did have the money, but the father decided not to put the money up. He declined to put up the $3,000 to bail his own son out of jail. So Khalif, without the money to bail himself out, stayed in jail at New York's notorious Rikers Island facility. 16 years old, he's in Rikers Island on suspicion of an armed robbery. Now, it took about a week, maybe 2 weeks, if I believe the story correctly. I may be missing the dates, but around that time, Khalif's mother was able to talk to people in their community and gather up enough money to where she had finally the $3,000 to bail her son out of jail on suspicion of armed robbery. But by that point, Khalif's records had gotten back into the system, and Khalif had a previous charge that caused him to no longer be allowed to bail out. So by the time they finally got the money together, he could not bail out of jail. He had to stay in until his court date. So he finally gets a court date, whatever amount of time later, maybe a week, couple weeks, maybe a month, gets a court date. And this is what they do in the criminal justice system. Again, for those of you who are unaware, when you get charged with something like this, as Khalif was, what they first offer you is a plea deal. When you don't have a lawyer, and Khalif could not afford a lawyer, he couldn't even afford $3,000 to bail himself out of jail. So he definitely could not afford a private attorney. So he had a public defender. And what they do is offer you a plea deal. And what a plea deal is the charge that you've been offered. Let's say that the charge that you were originally arrested on is a level 10 charge, like in terms of severity. You got charged with a level 10, all right, on a scale of, let's say, 0 to 100. Level 10 charge, and you say, I am not guilty of this charge. I'm gonna fight the charge. The court system doesn't want to have to go through a trial and then go through all of that, because it takes up more time, it's more court dates, it's more files on the docket, it's more work for everybody. So what they hope to do is get everyone to accept the plea deal. What the courts, anytime they arrest someone, their aim is to get you to accept a plea bargain. Why? Because it closes your case faster. It allows them to get a stat. Because if you plead to something, let's say you got charged with a level 10 something, and you plead, meaning basically as a compromise, you say, all right, I will plead guilty to a level 5 without a trial instead of that level 10. Now the court can say, hey, here's a conviction, here's another criminal that we call. This goes into their statistics. All right, this is how the criminal justice system works. It goes into their stats. The same way a basketball player scores 20 points, and that's part of their stats. Getting someone to accept a plea deal is a statistic for the cop who arrested you, for that department, for the cop above that cop, for the sergeant, whoever, to make themselves look good. The police chief, when they roll out their stats on crime and how they fought crime, those stats that they show how they caught all these criminals and how crime went down, that's all part of this whole system, right? You watch the TV show The Wire, it will show you a whole lot about this. So anyway, they offered Khalif a plea deal. How about you accept a charge that's less than what we actually charged you with, but you have to plead guilty to it. This will go on your criminal record, your history as a human being, but you get out of jail right now because you're accepting this, and there'll be no jail time if you accept the compromise that we're offering you. And Khalif said, no, I did not commit this crime. I am not accepting a lesser charge. I'm not pleading guilty to anything. I'm pleading innocent. I didn't do it. I want to go to trial. Well, here's the problem with choosing to go to trial is that usually it takes a long time before the trial happens. If you accept the plea, you could be in jail for a week and be out. Now you have that on your record, but you're out of jail and you're free to live your life. But if you decide to go to trial and you don't have bail money, You could be in jail for a year, for 6 months, for 3 months, waiting for the trial date to actually happen. This is what happened to Khalif Browder. Mind you, again, he was 16 years old. He said, I want to go to trial. I'm not accepting a plea, because he knew that would go on his record, and he was adamant that he hadn't done it, and he didn't like the fact that they were trying to get him to accept something that he had not done at all. I would feel the exact same way. So he had to stay in jail until his court date. And what happens is you keep having these hearings. You have these pre-trial hearings, and all these motions get filed and this and that, and it goes back and forth, back and forth. Any of you who's ever had or been involved with or known someone who's been in a criminal court case, this is what happens. You have all these motions and this back and forth, and this happens and that happens, and you keep having to show up to court for things, and the trial hasn't even occurred yet. So Khalif kept having to go back and forth to court for this and that and the third, and mind you, he's been denied bail, so he has to stay in Rikers Island. Long story short, I'm not going to tell you all of it. Watch the documentary on Netflix. Khalif Browder stayed in Rikers Island for 3 years. And guess what happened by the time his trial finally came up? The charges got dropped, because the guy who had fingered him said he admitted, first of all, that he wasn't quite sure that was the guy, and he was in Mexico. This guy was Mexican. He was in New York at the time, but he was back in Mexico, and he didn't even want to fly to New York for the trial, because what the hell does he get for coming to the trial? He ends up not even showing up to the trial, so they had to drop the charges because they had no witness. They had nobody to finger Khalif Browder for the charge, so they ended up having to drop it. So this guy, Khalif Browder, 16 years old, 19 by the time he got out. Can you imagine? Any of you who's that age right now, can you imagine spending the ages 16 and 19 in jail, in the most notorious jail in the United States, Rikers Island, on a charge of something that you did not do? The charges were completely dropped. He wasn't even found not guilty. There was no trial. They had to drop the whole thing. All because, here's the only reason why it happened. Not because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Not because he was black. Not because this guy decided to finger him. The only reason Khalif Browder spent 3 years in Rikers Island is because he did not have the money to bail himself out when he got arrested on that charge. That's the only reason. 3 years. Oh, and that's not the end of the story. Let me tell you what happened after Khalif Browder got out of jail. He had spent some time in solitary confinement when he was in Rikers Island, and the documentary goes over all of this in much graphic detail, so I suggest you watch it. It is kind of dark, this documentary, but you need to see it because you need to know what's going on in the system. If you care about this stuff, you need to know what's going on. He had spent some time in solitary confinement because he would mouth off at the guards, and he would get in fights with these people and that people, and there are gangs in jail, and he refused to join the gang, so the gang would mess with him, and he ended up getting fights with the gang members. So he spent a lot of time in solitary confinement. And psychologists say, studies show that putting a person in a place where they are in solitary, they don't get to interact with other human beings, it fucks with your mind in ways that people would never understand. And this is why, if you ever hear anyone who is promoting prison reform, they are trying to do away with the whole system of solitary confinement because of what it does to people's minds psychologically. Khalif Browder spent so much time in solitary confinement, and being in jail messed his mind up so much that by the time he got out of Rikers Island, again, an innocent man, no new charge on his record, he couldn't really function in the world the way that he wanted to. Even though the documentary, here's the thing about the documentary, they did the documentary interviewing him. He is in the documentary talking many times to the cameras, telling them what was happening in Rikers Island and how he just refused to accept the plea deal and how he wanted to go to trial, and he was adamant that he had not committed any crime. So he's talking to them on this. So they were making this documentary just based off the time he had spent in Rikers Island, how terrible it was. But then it got worse. Khalif Browder killed himself. He hanged himself in his home in the Bronx shortly after he got out of jail, simply because of how his mind had gotten destroyed by his time in Rikers Island. All of this happened because that kid couldn't afford to bail himself out. His family couldn't afford to bail him out. And mind you, he had 3 or 4 adult siblings and a mom. All together couldn't come up with $3,000 or anything equivalent to $3,000. A home, a car, anything that they could have put up. Get a loan from somebody, a friend, nothing to come up with $3,000 to bail him out of jail. He ended up killing himself. Now, you might be wondering, what's the big deal with just accepting the plea? I mean, maybe you're not wondering that, but let me explain to you why he didn't want to accept that plea. Because in neighborhoods like where Khalif was from, again, you watch the documentary, you can get a good sense of where he was from just by looking at the images and the visuals there. It's because if you were to accept a plea deal in that case, and now it's on your record that you have maybe a felony or a misdemeanor, or you committed a robbery or a certain type of charge, something related to violent crime or drugs or anything like that, the place where you live can evict you from your housing simply because you have that on your record. So if Khalif had accepted, hey, all right, then I'll accept the misdemeanor robbery charge, it would be really hard for him anywhere in the city of New York to apply for and be granted an apartment lease. Nobody would lease him an apartment because, all right, you got on your record that you robbed somebody. Why would we want you to move into our building? And if he wants to get a job somewhere and they do a background check on him, they see he has an armed robbery charge or he got a charge for selling some marijuana, why would anybody want to hire him for a job when they can hire somebody who doesn't have that charge of equal qualifications? As you can see, just getting that on your record, even if, again, you accepted a plea deal, just getting it on your record means you won't be able to get a place to live, you will not be able to get a job. Then what do you have to do? If you don't have a place to live and you don't have a job, let's say you have kids, what are you supposed to do to feed your kids? What are you supposed to do to pay for, let's say somebody let you crash at their apartment, how do you pay them? You can't get a job. Now you ain't got no choice but to do what? Maybe go sell some more drugs so that you can at least put some food on your table and feed your son or your daughter. And now what? Now you get arrested for a crime that you actually did, and now you're in the system. Now you get another charge. Now it's even harder for you to get a house or to get a job. Now what happens? Now you got to do more crime to try to eat again. And this is how, any of you who ever wonders, why do you see black and brown people going in and out of jail over and over and over again? It seems to be a cycle repeating itself. This is why. It starts with people not having resources. It starts with people just being too broke to bail themselves out of situations. Let's say you had gotten to that same situation. Somebody fingered you for an armed robbery. You would say it's ridiculous. You'd be in jail. They would still arrest you. They would still process you. They still put you in a cell. All you would do is make a phone call, probably one phone call, maybe two at the most. And what's going to happen next? Somebody's going to call a lawyer, a private attorney. They're going to bail you out. You're going to be out of jail. That private attorney is going to go to court and they're going to crush the shit out of that bullshit case and you'll be free and that'll be erased from your record and you'll have a great story to tell. But what if you're broke? What if you come from a poor family? Nobody has that kind of money. They can't afford a lawyer, let alone can they afford to even bail you out of jail. Now you got to stay in jail while you wait trial. And let's say it takes 3 years before you go to trial. Would you stay in jail for 3 years waiting for a trial? Or would you just accept the plea so you can get out of jail in a week? What would you do? Now do you understand? Those of you who never thought about this, never been privy to this information, now do you understand how the prison system can fuck up a black or brown, not only just the life of that individual person. Khalif Browder was a 16-year-old kid. Imagine he was a 36-year-old grown man. Same situation, walking home from a party at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe he's walking home from going to see his girlfriend, 2 o'clock in the morning. He gets fingered for the exact same charge. He's 36. Let's say he got 3 kids. And he don't have $3,000 to bail himself out. His girlfriend or his wife doesn't have the $3,000 either. And they don't know anybody who has it either. And what's his choices? Stay in jail for 3 years, awaiting trial, or take that plea deal, accept that you admit guilt to a crime that you know you didn't commit, but now that's on your record, and now you still got to feed your 3 kids. Now you got fired from your job because they know about the charge that you accepted. Now you can't live in your apartment anymore because they kicked you out, and now you got 3 kids and a wife to support. What the hell are you supposed to do? Just because you got fingered for that charge and you were too broke to defend yourself. This is what we call, for those of you who don't know, this is called the prison industrial complex. There's a great book written on this subject called The New Jim Crow. The author her name is Michelle Alexander. If you have never heard of that book or heard of the author, you have now. Go read that book. Go educate yourself. If you want to talk about something being systemic, all right, here's the one thing that is tangible, that is understandable, it is explainable. I just gave you a hard, real life example of how it happened to one person. But let me tell you something. This happens to people every single day in impoverished areas. That exact scenario that I laid out, exactly what happened to Khalif Browder, happens to people every single day. Not because they're criminals, but because they can't afford to prove that they're not criminals. Again, the book is called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. We're still on point number 1 here. I hope everybody's staying with me. That was just about the prison system. Now I told you there are 5 areas that are related to money. First of all, wealth, incarceration we just did, jobs, housing, and health. So we talked a little bit about health. Let's talk about housing. Why is housing, what does housing have to do with anything systemic or anything that has to do with race? Well, where I live right now, I live in a nice part of Miami. All right, in this area of Miami, what I pay to live here, I could get me a nice 5 or 6 bedroom house in Iowa or Wyoming or something. I got the biggest house in town with what I pay here. And I'm telling you that not to impress you, but to impress this upon you. When I go outside of my apartment, if I seen 5 cops standing right outside my building right now, outside of my condominium, my heart would not skip a beat. I would not get an adrenaline rush. I wouldn't be worried at all. I'll walk right up to the cops. Hey, how you doing, officers? They say, hey, how you doing? Turn right around and go right back to drinking their Starbucks. Why is that? Is it because I'm not black? Because I'm not tall with tattoos? No, it's because in this area, the cops ain't looking for crime, and there's no heated relations. But where Khalif Browder is from, the situation's a little bit different. In those areas, here's what happens with police departments. Again, for those of you who don't know, watch the TV show The Wire. This will give you a great example of this. Police departments, as I already explained to you, their stats are how many people they arrest and how much crime they, quote, catch, close quote, even if it's not actual crime. So what do? Knowing that if a police officer knows that his job and his career advancement is based on how much crime he is able to catch and fight, so to speak, his boss is going to tell him, because the boss is trying to move up as well, right? The boss wants to look good too, to his bosses. They're going to tell them, he's going to send more cops to the areas where the crime is occurring, or where they think the crime is occurring, usually where the crime actually is occurring. You got people dealing drugs and robbing people and things like that because they didn't have resources to begin with. They have no other way to make money, so they're committing some crimes. So what do? They send all their police officers to where the crime is being committed, and what do? They are stopping and frisking. They are messing with people, even when those people don't seem to actually be doing anything. They are actually catching criminals in the process of this. And because there is so much police activity going on, and there is so much energy between the police and those black and brown people in those areas, and these are often black and brown areas, what happens? Eventually, some mistakes occur. Eventually, some brutality occurs. Eventually, somebody gets killed by a cop, because these cops are used to being in these areas dealing with certain types of people, and those people are used to dealing with the cops and not liking the way that the cops deal with them. And this is why they had a hostility towards cops, and this is how things like that end up occurring. Again, in the neighborhood that I come from, the neighborhood that I live in rather, these type of things don't happen because that energy doesn't exist. That tension doesn't exist because the intentions of the people, those police officers who come around here, are completely different. I guarantee you that a police officer, I should ask a cop this. Maybe next time I see one, I'll ask him. When a police officer comes to the neighborhood that I live in right now to do police work, usually there ain't much to be done around here. The most biggest police work will be somebody in one apartment or condo yelling at somebody in the next condo because they're making too much noise. That's about the extent of police work. When they come around here, they have a lot less tension, I would suppose, than when they go to an impoverished area where they're used to arresting people and people getting violent and people not liking to see cops. I would guess that. If I got any cops listening to this, let me know if I'm right about that. People die of poor health because they got shitty doctors. They can't afford the better doctors, so they got to go to the shit doctor who doesn't know what they're doing, and they prescribe the wrong thing or don't notice, they don't diagnose the right thing, and they end up dying because the doctor doesn't know what they're doing. They couldn't afford a doctor who was a little bit better. People live in nice neighborhoods and go to nice doctors, and they can bail themselves out of jail on bullshit charges, and they can live in nice housing. Why? Because they can afford to. Is this true or is this not true? Those of you who are listening to me right now, you got a good private doctor? You got a nice job? You live in a nice area where you feel comfortable letting your kids go outside and you don't have to stand outside and watch them and make sure nothing happens to them? If you were sick, do you know who you could call? If someone arrested you on a bullshit charge right now, do you know what lawyer you could call to get yourself out of jail? Do you know who you could call who would be able to come up with $3,000 to get you out today if you needed it? If you answer yes to all those questions, why is that? Is it because you're white? No, it's not because you're white, because I'm sure there's a black and brown person listening to me right now who can answer all those questions that I just asked. What is it? It's because you got resources, because you have money. When you don't have money or don't know how to get money and don't know what to do, even if you did have money, you can end up stuck in a dead-end job that pays little. It keeps you stuck. You're in a neighborhood, you don't see a way out. The only way you see out is to maybe do some crime. And then, since the police are all over there looking for people doing crime, there's a much better chance you get caught doing crime there than it is in any other place, because they're around looking for somebody doing crime. They patrol areas where the crime is happening. Where does crime happen most? Where people ain't got shit. Now, that's where crime happens. Crime doesn't happen where black or brown people are. Crime happens where people don't have anything. And it can be white people too. These elements, if you want to talk about anything being systemic, this is where it starts. But I wouldn't even say that it's racist. Let's move on to point number 2. The topic here today is why it's not bigger than money. Now, I just gave you a whole lot about how money is the root of a lot of this, but I don't think it's racist. I don't think the system was created, let's destroy black people by doing this. I think the system has evolved into it being very classist. In other words, if you are of lower class, you get treated this way. This is the type of situations that you had to deal with. This is the type of life that you gotta live. These are the effects, everything I just talked about so far, the effects of people who are poor and broke. Doesn't matter what color you are. If you happen to be black, or brown, or white, if you're poor and broke, these are the kind of situations you got to deal with. Give these same people economic empowerment and economic knowledge, I guarantee you they wouldn't be dying as much, they wouldn't be in jail as much, they wouldn't have criminal records like they do, they would have better jobs, they would have more money, they'd be able to buy their way out of situations. You got poor health, you can pay for it. You can buy some certain things. Now, wealth doesn't buy health, but wealth can buy you a good doctor who can at least tell you what health is. All right, wealth doesn't stop you from being a criminal, but wealth can get you out of jail on a bullshit charge that you know you didn't do it. It can even get you beating the charge when you did do it, if you got a good lawyer. I mean, you've seen plenty of examples of that, right? When people have economic power and economic knowledge, a lot of these same problems that I'm talking about, they immediately go away. And somebody tell me that I'm wrong. Now, am I saying that means there are no problems if you have money? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a lot of the root cause problems that a lot of poor and broke people have, and this is systemic because it goes down from generation to generation. Imagine if any of you who grew up with a father in the house, imagine if your father wasn't in the house because he couldn't live in your neighborhood because they wouldn't let him in because he had a criminal charge, or because he kept going in and out of jail, and not even because he was a career-born criminal, but because maybe he had to do something one time, maybe he didn't do anything, he pled guilty to a charge just so he could not have to spend a year in jail so he could raise you, but then he couldn't live in the apartment anymore, then he had to do crime, and then he had a real charge, and then he couldn't come around anymore, then he couldn't get a job, and then he just ends up going in and out of jail. He spends most of his life in jail, not because he was born to be a criminal, but because the system was set up for that to happen to him. Imagine that. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, if somebody makes a bad decision or does the wrong thing and they end up in that situation, isn't it actually their fault? Again, read the book, The New Jim Crow, and you'll understand why. If black people want to protest something, if they want to fight for change, all right, this is the type of protest that I could say, I completely understand this and I can give you some information to support it. Now, the type of protest that I've been seeing, I don't quite know what the goal is. I'm not saying I'm not saying that they're wrong. I don't know what the goal is. But this one, if people want to protest this, I get this one. I read the book. Read the book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. It will explain it to you clearly. You will have no questions when you get done with that book. Point number 3. Today's topic is why it is not bigger than money. So what does all this have to do with the NBA? Well, if the NBA players decided to sit out, they would lose over $1 billion in personal revenue that would go into their pockets. And some players are saying, well, it would be a distraction to play basketball because we could be doing something else. Well, what? What are you going to do? I mean, you're a full-time basketball player. You're not a full-time activist. You're not a full-time political consultant. You're not a full-time, you don't know anything about the prison system like that. You probably never had to be in it because you're a great athlete. So any problems that you got into, somebody would have got you out. Somebody with the resources, even if you didn't have them, would have helped you get out. You are an unqualified basketball player to be doing anything else for 8 hours a day besides playing ball. And that's not a knock on it. I did this whole episode about why I didn't like the whole more than an athlete thing. Listen, nothing wrong with being an athlete. If you're great at being an athlete, be great at it. I heard it pays well. Why do you need to be doing something else? Do that, get the money, then use your resources to help other people out. What I've been talking about this whole time today is the lack of resources that causes a lot of black and brown people to end up in the situations that they're in. Not because they're bad people, not because they're dumb, but because they don't have the resources to do anything other than what they're doing. So if basketball players were to not play basketball, now you got 8 hours a day to do anything, what are you going to do? What's the goal that you're looking to achieve, number 1? Number 2, what's the plan to get there? And number 3, who's in charge? I've had those same 3 questions about everything that I've seen happening in America over the last couple of months. I haven't gotten any clear answers from anybody yet. If somebody has some, let me know. On top of all this, if the NBA players, this is something that a lot of people don't know and didn't think about. If the NBA players had sat out or are sitting out by the time you listen to this, whatever ends up happening, the owners of those teams, they could rip up the collective bargaining agreement, which is basically the agreement between the union and the organization, between the NBA and the players union. And what they're going to do is take a bigger slice of the pie. It used to be that NBA players received about 57% of basketball-related income. That's the billions of dollars made through the NBA. Players got 57%. Then there was a lockout and the number went down. Then it went down again. Right now it's at 50%. NBA players, all of them together, their salaries is splitting up 50% of the money that is made through basketball. That's the agreement that's in place right now. If the players decided to sit out, the owners would most likely rip up that CBA. They have an option to do that, and they would create a brand new collective bargaining agreement where the players would definitely receive less than 50%. In other words, all the players' salaries would go down as a whole simply because the owners decided that they want to redo that agreement. So even though in the short term, it wouldn't affect people who already have contracts, but in the long term, it would affect the money of these black and brown players, majority black and brown players who have gotten rich through the NBA, and if you look at another sport, the NFL, those two institutions have made more black and brown Americans rich than any other job you can name. There's not one that comes close. So while saying, well, we don't want to go and work and just provide entertainment for them, or we're doing things to help the white owners and this and that, I've heard some players saying this, I've heard some retired players saying this, I've heard some people unqualified and uninformed saying these things. That looks good, it feels good, it even sounds good. It plays very well on social media, but it won't be good for you. It's not a smart thing to do. Point number 4, today's topic is why it is not bigger than money. It's not a wise precedent to set when you're making money at what you do, doing well and providing resources for yourself and showing other people how it can be done. But then you say, I'm going to sacrifice the resources because I want to protest. Protest what? You're protesting the very conditions that are a result of not having money. I want y'all to notice something. When y'all see these situations of black and brown people who are being either brutalized by police or killed by police, I understand, because I've seen the stats, I've seen the actual data, that these things get blown way out of proportion to how often they actually happen. They don't happen as often as the news media would make you feel like they happen. But let's just say, even one of them happening, have you ever noticed that the people who end up getting brutalized and killed is never a rich person? You never see an NFL player or a baseball player or a basketball player or a rich CEO of a company being brutalized by police. You never see a person who's running their own enterprise getting killed by a cop. It's usually someone in the lower classes who these things happen to. Why is that? If you have any idea why that happens? Because the police activity and the police doing the things that they do to fight crime, they're usually doing a whole lot of it in the areas where people don't have resources. Why are they doing it? Is it because they're trying to make people who don't have resources go to jail? No, they're doing it because, again, you always got to look at people's incentives. What do they get? What do the cops get for people not having money? They don't gain from you being broke. You know what they gain from? They gain from getting stats, making arrests, and fighting crime. Where if your job is to make as many arrests as possible and to fight as much crime as possible, where would you go for your work shift? You would go to where the most crime is taking place. Or if you're a sergeant or a lieutenant and you're in charge of dispatching troops, being your cops, to as many places as possible to fight as much crime as you possibly can in one day to make you look good so you can advance and maybe one day become the police chief, where are you going to send your officers? Because you know that whoever gets the most arrests and gets the most stats, they're the one who's going to advance in the company. And there are 4 other lieutenants all trying to get up and move ahead of you. You're trying to move ahead of them. Where would you get the most stats? You're going to send cops to where people have the fewest resources, because you understand that when people don't have resources, they resort to crime so they can eat. So this is why we see these things happening with police in America, is because they go to where the crime is taking place. They're not wrong to go there. All right, the cop's job is to fight crime. It's to serve and protect first, fight crime second, right? So being that their job is to fight crime, and being that they look good by fighting crime, or at least looking like they're fighting crime, they're going to go to where there's some crime to fight. All right, the cops don't want to stand around doing nothing all day where there's no crime happening. They want to go to where the crime is happening so they can get that stat and they can look good, or they can do it for their boss who's trying to look good, and they're just following orders. So they go to where people don't have resources, And this is where these things happen. And this is where, again, if this happened to somebody who was rich, somebody who had money, you know what would happen? The lawyers and the people with the resources will come down so hard on that police department or on that cop themselves and whoever was in charge or whatever, all right, they would be scared out of their minds to ever do that again. And it wouldn't happen again. These things happen to people who don't have resources because these people who don't have resources can't defend themselves. I'm not talking about when somebody ends up dying. Obviously, you can't defend yourself, you're not alive. But these type of things happen because the cops are going to where people don't have the resources, so they end up getting away with it more often. The stuff that you see on the news is not everything that's taking place. And I'm not saying that all of this that I'm talking about here is all about money. You know, basketball players or whoever saying that they want to they want to forego money because it's bigger than money so they can go protest. But they don't even understand that the very conditions that you are protesting against, the root cause of it is people's lack of resources. So what you should do is go get the resources. And if you really want to help, don't just go outside and march. Actually use your resources to help other people get resources so that they don't have to deal with the same issues that people are dealing with right now. That's the root of it, from what I see. Again, I'm not saying it is all about money, but I believe the root of it is resources. When people are broke and when people are poor, they get taken advantage of. They end up in situations where they cannot help themselves. Therefore, they end up with worse options. And this is why they die earlier. They have less chance. They end up resorting to crime. Things happen to them that are straight up unfair, and they can't do anything about the unfairness, even though they know it's unfair, because they don't have the resources to do anything. This is what it is. I see money as a major factor in this. You know, the saying is more money, more problems, right? Well, it's completely different resources when it's no money. Okay, there's more money, more problems, like the song by Puff Daddy and Big and Mace. Then there's no money, more problems. All right, which one would you rather have? I don't think you need to think hard to come up with an answer, do you? Let's recap today's class, which is why it is not bigger than money. Point number one, when I looked up the systemic racism, systemic oppression, I found 5 common things: wealth gap, incarceration gap, job gap, housing gap, and a health gap. What's at the root of all those? Money. Please go watch the Netflix documentary on Khalif Browder on what happened to him because he didn't have $3,000. Everything that happened to him is because he and his family all put together could not come up with $3,000 to get him out of jail on a charge of a crime that he didn't even commit. Read the book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. It'll tell you a whole lot about the prison industrial complexes. There's one thing people want to protest and really want to organize around a specific plan, around a specific goal. That's one that I could actually support if people can organize themselves enough to get to it. I'm not so optimistic that that's going to happen because I don't think we had the right leadership for it. But anyway, the book is out there for people who want the information. Now, I just told you about it. If you listen to me all this time, you should go read that book. Point number 2, this is all about class. It is not about race, it's about class. It's about people who are broke. If they happen to be black or brown, so be it. If they happen to be white, also so be it. There are white people dealing with these exact same things, but again, that doesn't get promoted on the news. These are the effects on people who are poor and broke. All right, when people have economic empowerment, these same issues do not occur. And again, look at yourself. Do you have economic empowerment? Do these things happen to you? Do they happen to people in your family? No and no. Why? Because you have the resources to never even be in these situations. If you were broke, these will be happening to you. Point number 3. When it comes to the NBA, players will lose a whole lot of money sitting out. And what are they going to do sitting out? Now, there's no outcome that they're after. There's no plan. Nobody is clearly in charge. So what are they actually going to do? I don't think they would do anything useful except make a whole lot of noise. And sound and fury signify nothing. Point number 4, it's not a wise precedent to sacrifice making money to protest the very conditions that are a result of people not having money. But people don't think deeply enough to even understand this, even though this isn't, I don't even think you need to go that deep to even understand this, but people don't think at all when they're in a mob mentality and following what they see on social media. So this is where we are. They say more money, more problems is a bigger problem to have no money and more problems. All right, again, you tell me which one you would want. Work on your game. Dre all day.